Welcome to the store. Don't forget to subscribe, and support me.
The continent of Eldora had known nothing but war for centuries. The humans, elves, and orcs all claimed to be the rightful rulers of the land, each convinced that the others were the source of their misery. And so, battle after battle was fought, bloody and merciless, leaving the land itself scarred by the hatred that festered between the races. Every year brought new conflicts, new casualties, and fewer reasons for hope. Elson grew up in the shadow of that war. The sound of clashing steel and the cries of the wounded were the lullabies of his childhood. His father, a warrior, had died on the battlefield when Elson was just a boy, killed in an Orcish raid that had burned his village to the ground. His mother, broken by grief, had withered away, leaving Elson alone by the age of 14. He became a soldier, as many young men did in his kingdom. It wasn't out of a sense of duty or loyalty. Elson simply wanted to survive. And in Eldora, survival meant becoming a weapon. By the age of 25, Elson was a seasoned warrior, his name known among the ranks of soldiers who had fought alongside him. He was good at what he did, though he never boasted. His sword was sharp, his reflexes quick, and his mind always alert. But deep down, he despised the war, even as it shaped his every breath. He had seen too many lives wasted, too many futures destroyed, and for what? Another piece of land? Another fleeting victory that would be reversed in a matter of months. It was during one of these battles, in the year the humans referred to as the Winter of Red Snow, that everything changed for Elson. His unit had been sent to recover a sacred relic, the Sword of the Ancients, from an ancient ruin. The sword, it was said, held the power to turn the tide of the war, to bring victory to whoever wielded it. But Elson didn't believe in legends. He believed in cold steel and calculated strategy. The ruin was deep in the contested land between human and Orcish territory, a crumbling stone fortress half buried by time and snow. Elson's unit of 6 soldiers had made their way through the desolate landscape, keeping low to avoid detection from any wandering orc patrols. The fortress was eerily silent as they entered, their breath visible in the cold air. Inside the ruin, among the remnants of a long-forgotten civilization, they found the sword. But they found something else as well. Hidden beneath the rubble, Elson uncovered a strange orb, unlike anything he had ever seen. It was smooth and cold to the touch, its surface dark and swirling with faint light, as if it held the essence of time itself. The moment Elson touched it, his vision blurred. Time seemed to stop, and he was pulled into a vision of the past, the present, and the future, all at once. He saw the battles that had ravaged the land, the faces of those who had fought and died, and the endless suffering that had plagued the continent for generations. And then he saw something else. The wars could be stopped. The orb, the chronomancer's sphere, held the power to control time, to alter events before they even occurred. It could erase the war from history, rewrite the fabric of reality itself. Elson felt the weight of that power press down on him. He could end it all. He could stop the suffering, bring peace to the land, and be remembered as the savior of Eldora. But as the visions continued, he saw something darker. The power to control time came with a price. The visions showed him a future where he became not a savior, but a tyrant. With the ability to control events, he could bend the will of every race to his own desires, reshape the continent in his image. The temptation was overwhelming. He heard a voice, faint but clear, emanating from the sphere. "Use me, and all will be as you wish. You can bring peace, true peace, by eliminating those who stand in your way. No more blood need be spilled, only your enemies will fall." Elson's hand trembled as he held the sphere. The power thrummed through him, alive and demanding. But as he looked at his comrades, standing in the cold ruin, waiting for his command, he realized what that path truly meant. It wasn't peace, it was domination. With a great effort, Elson pulled his hand away from the sphere. The visions faded, and time resumed its normal flow. He stared at the artifact, knowing that it could not fall into anyone's hands, not even his own. "We're leaving," he said to his unit. "The sword is ours, but we take nothing else." The return journey was uneventful, but Elson's mind was far from calm. The sphere's power gnawed at him, whispering in the back of his mind, urging him to reconsider. He knew he could never allow it to be used, but he also knew that hiding it wasn't enough. The war would continue unless something changed, unless someone found a way to bridge the centuries of hatred between the races. But was he that person? Elson had never considered himself a diplomat. He was a soldier, trained to kill, not to negotiate. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the sword they had recovered wasn't going to change anything. It was just another weapon, another tool to prolong the endless conflict. The only way to bring true peace was through something far more difficult: understanding, negotiation, and trust. That it was an idea that many would call foolish. The elves and orcs had no reason to trust humans, and the humans had no reason to trust them. But Elson couldn't shake the feeling that if he didn't try, if no one tried, the war would never end. With the sphere hidden away in a place known only to him, Elson set out on a journey that would take him across the continent. His first stop was the kingdom of the elves, deep within the forested realm of Elandriel. The elves had long been enemies of the humans, their elegant cities hidden beneath the ancient trees, protected by powerful magic and cunning warriors. Elson knew that approaching them as a human soldier would be dangerous, but he also knew that the only way forward was to take the risk. When he arrived at the edge of the elven realm, he was met not with diplomacy, but with blades. The elves had no interest in hearing his message. To them, he was just another human invader, come to stir up trouble. But Elson persisted. He refused to draw his sword, even as the elven guards surrounded him, their arrows trained on his heart. He spoke to them of peace, of the possibility of ending the war through words instead of weapons. At first, the elves laughed at him, their disdain for humans evident in every sneer. But one among them, an elven diplomat named Elira, saw something in Elson's determination. She had long been an advocate for peace, though her voice was often drowned out by those who believed war was the only way to secure their future. Curious about this human who would risk his life to speak of peace, she convinced the guards to take him to the Elven High Council. The council was less than welcoming. They had no reason to trust Elson, and his words were met with skepticism and outright hostility. The elves had suffered greatly in the war, losing countless lives to human and orcish aggression. Why should they believe that one human could change the course of history? Elson stood before the Elven High Council, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of their judgment pressed down on him, but he kept his eyes steady and his words clear. He had never imagined himself in this position, pleading for peace in a hall filled with his enemies. Yet, here he was, surrounded by the ancient, otherworldly beauty of the Elven Council chamber. Towering trees intertwined with the structure itself, their roots forming the foundation, their branches reaching up to support the ceiling. The air smelled of moss and old magic, a reminder of how deeply the elves were connected to this land. The council members, tall, graceful, and severe, sat in a semicircle, their expressions inscrutable. At the center sat Lord Finas, the head of the council, his silver hair shimmering like moonlight as he regarded Elson with cold, calculating eyes. Beside him was Elira, the only one who had shown him any kindness. Her eyes held a spark of hope, but even she seemed uncertain whether Elson could sway the council. You speak of peace, human, Lord Phoenix began, his voice as sharp as the blades that protected their realm. Yet it is your kind who has brought us nothing but war and destruction. Why should we trust you? Elson took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment that would determine everything. He had no magic, no grand speech prepared. All he had was the truth. I don't ask you to trust me, he said. I ask you to listen. I grew up in the same war you did. I've lost family, friends, just like all of you. But I've come to realize that if we continue down this path, there won't be anything left for any of us. We'll fight until we've destroyed everything. The council remained silent, their gazes unwavering. Elson felt the doubt creeping in. He could feel the weight of centuries of mistrust bearing down on him. But he pressed on. I've been a soldier my whole life. I know how to fight, how to kill. But I also know that continuing to do so won't solve anything. There's a better way, but it requires all of us, humans, elves, and orcs, to come to the table. We have to end this cycle of violence, not through magic or force, but through diplomacy. It won't be easy, and I'm not naive enough to think it will happen overnight. But if we don't at least try, we're condemning ourselves to endless bloodshed. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Elson could feel his pulse in his throat as he waited for a response. He had risked everything to come here, to speak these words. But had it been enough? Lord Phoenix's lips thinned into a grim line. And what of the orcs? They do not value diplomacy. They respect only strength. You say you wish to speak with them, but how do you propose to do so without being torn apart the moment you set foot on their land? I've already considered that, Elson replied, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. The orcs value strength, yes. But they also respect honor. I intend to meet with their chieftain, Graknor, and prove to him that peace can be achieved through more than just war. A murmur rippled through the council. It was clear that the idea of Elson, a human, walking into the heart of orc territory unarmed was absurd to them. But he had expected their disbelief. What they didn't understand was that Elson had learned something on the battlefield that transcended any cultural differences. Survival was a language everyone understood. Lord Phoenix's gaze narrowed. You are either very brave or very foolish, human. But Elira speaks for you, and her judgment is not something I take lightly. If you wish to pursue this path, then so be it. But understand this, if you fail, there will be no second chances. The elves will not wait for another attempt at peace. War will be our only course. Elson nodded, his resolve hardening. I understand. Elira's face softened with relief, though she quickly composed herself. Then I will accompany him, she said, stepping forward. If there is to be peace, the elves must be represented in these talks. The council did not object, though the tension in the room remained thick. Elson could tell that many of them still doubted whether this mission could succeed. But doubt was something he had lived with his entire life. It had never stopped him before. That evening, as they prepared to leave the elven city, Elira approached Elson. She wore a cloak of deep green, blending into the forest around them, but her sharp features were softened by the firelight as she regarded him. You speak well for a soldier, she said, her voice quiet but thoughtful. Elson smiled slightly. I've had a lot of practice. But words are only half the battle. And the other half? Surviving long enough to make people listen. They set out the next morning, a small contingent of elves accompanying them for protection. The journey to the Orcish stronghold was long and treacherous, the path winding through mountains and dense forests. Elson had never ventured this far into Orcish territory before, and the tension among the group was palpable. Orcs were known for their ferocity in battle, and many considered them nothing more than beasts, ruthless and violent, without the capacity for reason, but Elson knew better. He had faced orcs on the battlefield, seen their strength and their loyalty to one another. They were not mindless brutes, they fought for survival, just like everyone else. He hoped that Graknor, their chieftain, would see the value in what he was offering. When they reached the outskirts of the Orcish lands, the mood grew darker. Smoke rose from distant fires, and the land itself seemed harsher, more unforgiving. The elves grew uneasy, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons, but Elson kept his sword sheathed. They couldn't afford to make the wrong impression. A scout spotted them before they even entered the main camp, and within minutes, a group of Orcish warriors had surrounded them. The orcs were as intimidating as Elson remembered, towering figures with muscular builds, their skin a deep shade of green, their eyes sharp and calculating. "State your purpose," one of the orcs growled, his hand gripping the hilt of an axe that looked more than capable of cleaving a man in two. Elson stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I come to speak with Graknor," he said. "I seek an audience with your chieftain." The orc regarded him with suspicion. "Humans don't come here for conversation." "This one does," Elson replied. "I've come to offer a chance for peace." The orc narrowed his eyes but eventually nodded. "Follow me. But if you're lying, you won't leave here alive." Elson nodded, signaling for Elira and the others to follow. The tension was thick as they were led through the Orcish camp, the eyes of every warrior watching them with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. The camp was vast, filled with makeshift tents and the scent of cooking meat. Fires burned in large pits, and the ground was hardened by years of marching feet. Graknor's tent was larger than the others, positioned at the center of the camp. The chieftain himself sat outside, sharpening a massive blade with slow, deliberate strokes. He was a mountain of a man, even by Orcish standards, his presence radiating authority. His tusks jutted from his mouth, and his eyes were cold as they locked onto Elson. "Speak," Graknor growled, not bothering to rise. "Why should I listen to a human?" Elson took a breath and stepped forward. "Because I offer you something greater than victory on the battlefield. I offer you peace." Graknor's laughter was a deep, rumbling sound, but there was no humor in it. "Peace? There is no peace with humans. Only death." "I don't ask for your surrender," Elson said. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because I believe there's a way for all of us to survive, humans, elves, and orcs. The war doesn't have to go on forever." Graknor's eyes narrowed. "And what makes you think I care about your ideas of survival, human? We have survived by strength, by fighting for what is ours. You come here with words, but words don't win battles." Elson met his gaze steadily. "Then let me prove to you that my words have value. Challenge me. If I fail, you can kill me. But if I succeed, you agree to hear me out." There was a long pause. The orcs gathered around them began to murmur, some eager for the spectacle, others skeptical of the humans' chances. Graknor considered Elson's offer for a long moment before standing, his massive frame towering over the others. "You wish to prove yourself," he rumbled. "Very well, human. Let's see if your blood is as strong as your words." Elson braced himself as Graknor unsheathed his sword, the weight of the challenge settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future of the continent Elson stood facing Graknor, the weight of the orc's challenge pressing down on him like an anvil. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the camp. Orcs gathered in a circle around them, eager for the spectacle. Graknor's blade gleamed in the fading light, and Elson could feel the pulse of danger in the air. He had no illusions about how this would go. Graknor was not just a brute but a seasoned warrior, larger and stronger than anyone Elson had faced. But strength wasn't everything. Elson had something else on his side: determination, and the belief that this was the only way forward. Graknor made the first move, swinging his massive blade with the precision of a warrior who had fought countless battles. Elson narrowly avoided the strike, feeling the wind from the blade as it passed. He ducked low and rolled to the side, his own sword coming up just in time to block Graknor's next attack. The impact rattled through Elson's arms, but he held firm. The orcs watching them roared, some cheering for their chieftain, others watching in silence. Graknor was relentless, his blows powerful and precise, but Elson knew he couldn't win by matching strength with strength. He had to outthink him. He had to be faster. Graknor swung again, but this time Elson didn't block. Instead, he stepped inside the orc's guard, using his smaller size to his advantage. He landed a quick strike to Graknor's side, not enough to injure but enough to show that he could land a blow. Graknor grunted in surprise but didn't slow down. He turned and lashed out with a backhanded strike, catching Elson across the arm. The blow wasn't deep, but it sent a shock of pain through him. Elson gritted his teeth and kept moving, refusing to let the injury slow him down. He knew this fight couldn't last long. Graknor had the stamina to go for hours, but Elson needed to end it quickly. He waited for the next opening, watching the way Graknor moved, anticipating his strikes. When the orc lunged again, Elson feinted to the left, then spun to the right, bringing his sword down in a clean arc. His blade stopped just short of Graknor's throat. For a moment, the entire camp was silent. The orcs stared, some in disbelief, others with new respect. Graknor stood motionless, his chest rising and falling as he looked down at the blade resting near his neck. Slowly, a grin spread across his face. "You fight well, human," he rumbled, stepping back and lowering his weapon. "Better than I expected." Elson lowered his sword, his breath coming fast. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to talk." Graknor's grin faded, replaced by something more thoughtful. He glanced at the orcs around him, then back at Elson. "You've proven yourself. I'll listen to what you have to say." That night, Elson and Elira sat with Graknor by the fire, discussing what had brought them to this moment. Elson spoke of the endless war, the lives lost on all sides, and the possibility of something different. He didn't promise a perfect peace, he knew that was impossible, but he did offer a chance for something better. A chance for survival. Graknor listened in silence, occasionally grunting in acknowledgement. When Elson finished, the orc chieftain sat back, his eyes fixed on the flames. "You speak of peace," Graknor said, his voice low. "But peace is a fragile thing. I've seen what happens when peace is offered and then shattered. It breaks people, breaks entire nations. How can you be sure this time will be different?" Elson met his gaze. "I can't be sure. But if we don't try, we're just condemning ourselves to more war. We can't keep fighting like this forever. We'll destroy ourselves." Graknor nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You have courage, Elson. That's something I respect. And I'll admit, this war has cost us all more than we care to count. I'll agree to this meeting, but make no mistake, if I sense treachery, I'll strike first and ask questions later." Elson nodded. "That's all I'm asking." The next few days were tense. Arrangements were made for a summit, a meeting between the leaders of the humans, elves, and orcs. It was an unprecedented step, one that had never been attempted before. There were those on all sides who opposed the idea, who believed that the war was the only way forward. But Elson pushed on, refusing to let fear and doubt stop him. The summit was held in a neutral territory, a vast valley surrounded by mountains that had long been considered a no-man's land. Representatives from each race arrived, their expressions hard and mistrustful. Elson stood at the center of it all, feeling the weight of their gazes on him. He knew that one wrong word, one misstep, could send everything spiraling back into chaos. The negotiations were difficult from the start. The elves accused the humans of breaking past treaties, the orcs claimed that the elves had always looked down on them, and the humans argued that both races had taken advantage of them in times of weakness. The air was thick with tension, and more than once it seemed like the meeting would dissolve into violence, but Elson didn't give up. He mediated between the groups, finding common ground where there seemed to be none. He spoke of the future, of the need for cooperation in a world that had grown too small for endless war. Slowly, painfully, progress was made. Concessions were offered, compromises reached. Graknor's presence helped, his word carried weight among the orcs, and his respect for Elson made others more willing to listen. Elira was also invaluable. Her diplomatic skills, honed over years of service to the Elven High Council, helped to smooth over some of the rougher moments. She spoke with passion about the possibility of a future without constant bloodshed, and her words carried the authority of someone who had seen too much death. After days of negotiations, a tentative agreement was reached. It wasn't a perfect peace, but it was a start. The three races agreed to cease hostilities, to begin rebuilding their lands and their people. Elson knew that this was only the beginning, that trust would take time to rebuild, and that there would always be those who sought to undermine the peace. But for the first time in his life, he felt hope. The day after the summit, Elson stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. The armies had already begun to withdraw, each race returning to its own territory to honor the new accords. Elira stood beside him, her eyes on the distant mountains. "You did it," she said quietly. Elson shook his head. "We all did it. I couldn't have done this alone." "But you believed it was possible," she said, turning to him. "That's more than most people would have dared." Elson didn't answer right away. His mind drifted to the sphere, hidden far away from this place, its power still lingering in the back of his mind. He had resisted the temptation to use it, to force peace through control. But now, looking at the fragile peace they had forged, he knew that it would have never lasted if it had been imposed by force. Real peace could only come through understanding, through the willingness to fight for something other than victory. As they stood in silence, Graknor approached, his heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel. The orc chieftain looked out over the valley, his expression thoughtful. "You've proven me wrong, Elson," he said gruffly. "I didn't think humans were capable of this. Of real peace." Elson smiled slightly. "Neither did I, to be honest." Graknor chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Well, let's hope it lasts. I'm not getting any younger, and I'd like to see my people thrive before I'm gone." They stood together, the three of them, human, elf, and orc, looking out over the valley where peace had been forged. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't certain. But it was a beginning. Elson turned to Graknor and Elira, a sense of calm settling over him. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." And for the first time in his life, Elson truly believed that was possible.